I recently was introduced to the idea of the warrior's path, as it's referred to. And this is a term that's specifically used in the context of paganism and other earth-based spiritualities, Wicca and whatnot. No, I don't know all that much about Wicca or paganism. But I don't think I need to know that much to point out something. Firstly, earth-based spiritual people generally tend to have reeds and sort of tenets of life that say, be peaceful for the most part, right? Like, I think most spiritualities generally center around being peaceful. And paganism and Wicca are no exception, really. I think Wicca has like this, there's a threefold law, which may or may not apply to Wicca, but is generally referenced a lot in these practices. There's the idea that, and ye harm none, do as you will, right? So it's basically, as long as you don't hurt anyone, do what you want. Which is, that would be a discussion for another time as far as tacking down specifically how we're defining harm. But despite that, the idea is that you should only do, magic or spells or work, activating work, whatever, that is doing good for yourself or others and whatever. And you can find this type of idea in basically almost all spiritualities, honestly. From what I've seen in Buddhism is some branches of Buddhism can be quite masochistic, priding themselves in turning the other cheek over and over and over and over and over again. And yeah, I have a very different perspective when it comes to such matters, which is partly why I looked into the warrior's path. The general idea being like, okay, yeah, so we want to do good and we generally want to be peaceful, but then like, when does that switch happen for you? When and where does that switch happen for you that you realize that being peaceful might actually be a part of the problem, and that you are not necessarily morally superior for not defending yourself, for not fighting back, for not calling out the bullshit for what it is. I think it's very obvious that, karma and threefold law just don't apply to reality. Look around, we're afraid to, wish death upon our enemies, or we're afraid to even have the thought. We're afraid to all of that. Meanwhile, these heinous demons are profiting off of their evilness. Like, the cruelty that they enact, the sheer levels of cruelty that they enact and have been doing for thousands of years, has been quite profitable to them. So, threefold law, I mean, maybe you can turn that around and say, like, well, the more heinous and cruel and destructive you are, the more you get to take for yourself. You get to take, I mean, it's like, that's really what I see as what it happens in the world. That's not my values. That's not the world I want to live in. That's not the world I want to just accept and move forward with. I think it's just very obvious that men have created a world where their cruelty is not only not punished, but they benefit from it, right? They benefit from being cruel to women and girls because it makes us easier to control. It makes us easier for them to access. When men hoard resources, again, makes it easier to control other people. You use violence to take things from others. You now have those things. You know, there's no spiritual energy that's like keeping track of that. I can assess that this is how the world works, and I wish it didn't work that way. It doesn't make any sense to bind myself up with ideas of that I should be nothing like them in any way whatsoever. That like, well, I don't want to be bad like them, so I'm going to tie my hands together so I can't hurt anyone. Does that make any sense to do that? Like, explain to me how that's somehow a solution. So at what point do you start fighting back? At what point do you start thinking about death and violence, like I talked about in one of my more recent videos, in a new frame of mind? When do you start understanding the meaning of those words in a new way? Rather than shunning them as like these bad things that you should never, ever, ever do, or never, ever, ever cause. That maybe that Puritanism surrounding those notions is actually binding us from doing what needs to be done. And I've actually been meaning to talk about this for a while, this idea that love is not letting your daughter get raped. Love is not letting men ravage the earth. Love is not letting all of that stuff happen and just accepting it, working on acceptance or whatever, you know, or learning to be more tolerant. That is amoral, I think, or that is having a lack of moral substance. Because if you actually love something, if it actually means something to you and it's something that you value, then you should be able to fight for it, you know. Even if it's a losing battle, and even if whether you actually fight or not is not even really what I'm talking about, but the very idea of fighting, of understanding that that's what needs to be done, is important to understand. What I'm really trying to get at here are the thought-stopping ideas of, you know, positivity, peace, and love, and, you know, loving your enemy or whatever kind of bullshit that is. Women in particular, we try to moralize our lack of action when the real reason is just that we don't have power. We don't have the resources, we don't have the numbers, we don't have the weaponry, we don't have we don't have a lot of stuff. You know, men basically have all the power at this point. So to be honest with ourselves, it would be more honest to say we don't fight back because it's pointless. Or we don't fight back because we're just going to lose whatever little bit we have, and we don't want to risk that. I don't want to fight because I'm scared. That would still be more honest and a legitimate reason for not fighting. It's way more honest than trying to convince yourself that you're somehow, you know, morally enlightened or morally evolved for doing nothing. But what I ended up finding out about the warrior's path, and again, there's definitely a lot more to it than like what I'm talking about here. But something that came to my attention about the warrior's path is that what's often brought up is pagans in the military. And this struck me as odd the first few times I read it or heard it. And it didn't quite like make sense to me. Pagans in the military. Okay, like I get that people join the military, fine. But how does that equal the warrior's path? Because you're using violence to oppress other people? Like, how does joining the enemy put you on the warrior's path? How does that make you a warrior for your own people when you join the enemy? Like, how is the military not obviously seen as the enemy here. The military is literally the gun that is being held to our heads and the heads of people all over the world to keep us oppressed, to maintain the system as it is. I mean, the rulers of the world, the male rulers of the world, wouldn't be able to oppress people, wouldn't be able to take land and resources, wouldn't be able to round people up and put them in camps, wouldn't be able to kill people, wouldn't be able to rape women and enslave us if they didn't have the guns to back it up. What do you think the military is? What do you think it's for? So the irony to me is really just palpable. For someone of any minority group who's thinking about ideas of like how to fight back, or at least how to embrace those values to one degree or another, would then go join the military, you know? I mean, that's following that old saying, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em. That's exactly what you've done. You've joined the enemy. You've betrayed your people. You're not a warrior for your people. You're a traitor of your people. Yes, I am judging you. Go cry about it. This is something that I think maybe that's what happens to the males of particular minority groups, you know. Actually, I see that a lot, you know. Native American men join the military, black men join the military, gay men try to join the military, or, you know. Looking at the men of minority communities, they just don't really get it, I don't think. They really just don't get it. Oh, who was it that was saying that? That no true revolution can come from men? Many women have said that. Ugh, I'm so terrible at remembering who has said specific things, and I want to give credit where credit is due. But many women have said that, you know, men aren't capable of true revolution. Men aren't capable of overturning the system. They don't want to overturn the system. They just want to tweak it so that they themselves get a bigger piece of the pie at the expense of women. At the expense of the women of their own communities, at the expense of the women of their own races, of their own cultures, of their own languages. That's what men do best, right? They seek brotherhood with their white superiors, you know, because they do think that white men are superior. And I would say that white men are superior parasites, is what I would say. I would say their track record of parasitism is quite superior to other men in the world, but other men in the world have really demonstrated their ability to be effective parasites. Their freedom equals joining their oppressors. Obviously, for women, that doesn't make sense, even though there are women who think that also should make sense for them, and they try to join the military too, and they do join the military. I don't know what makes them think that they're going to find their liberation as a woman or as a minority of any sort in literally joining the military forces of your oppressor. That doesn't make any fucking sense to me. But more often than not, what you do here with women is the opposite of like this idea of the warrior's path. Women aren't even allowed to think about death or violence. It's a thought crime. And you see it so much, again, going back to earth-based spiritualities and, you know, various, you know, those types of communities, whether it's New Age, whether it's, you know, Wicca, paganism, whether it's even, you know, male religions like Buddhism and Christianity. Women are constantly praised for having no backbone, constantly praised for feeling squicky at the idea of their own violence, you know, and not even liking to talk about it. They always like to talk about and pride themselves in being these passive, loving creatures that just let horrific shit keep happening. But because you try to, like, rise above it or some shit, that's somehow noble. And it's not. I'm telling you. it's not noble. It's not noble to not get angry when you fucking should. It's not noble to not hate the person who is hating you and continues to commit crimes against your kind. It's not noble to just accept that. That maybe our passivity is what is actually, in fact, enabling the demons to build their empires, to further their hell regimes. And in the case of women, I think that's, yes, actually absolutely true. Because when we are pacified, we literally just hand men the key to running the whole show. Because once they can control our bodies, then they just go completely unchecked. And again, then just kind of shifting gears here. But on the same note, I've been reading more of the Wickedary by Mary Daly. I have been reading it for a while, but I frequently go back and refer to a lot of terms or read different sections and stuff. And I've started adding my own words to my Wickedary, and I'd like to submit for your consideration some terms to add to your Wickedary, or to add to your vocabulary, or to just consider. So I want to talk about positivity, the word positivity, in two different ways. The first way is the foreground way, and I will spell it with a lowercase p to stay consistent with Mary Daly's spelling practices in the Wickedary. We refer to things in the foreground with lowercase letters. Positivity in the foreground actually is also known as positive thinking and positive mentality. It is a reversal that tells women to embrace being castrated and lobotomized. It is a stagnant state of being dissociated from righteous rage and true emotion. It's a negative state of moral weakness that stops women from standing up for and protecting what we love. It is tragic hopelessness dressed up as enlightenment and complacency disguised as acceptance, which is going back to what I said about these things being dressed up as moral superiority, or as being pious even. Taking what someone has done to you and the crimes they committed against you and turning that into just, well, I'm just going to be more of a loving person because that somehow resolves the issue. Anyway, that is the lowercase positivity word. And the other version of positivity, the background version of positivity, for those of you that don't know what I mean by foreground, background, those are terms that Mary Daly coined to refer to, basically the foreground is patriarchy and the world that we live in and the waking nightmare that we walk through every day. And the background, with a capital B, is any place that is woman-centered, and that could be in the here and now, where women are conjuring up our inherent energies, connecting to our true self, connecting to each other, speaking our truths. And the background could also refer to a sort of magical existential land that transcends time and space in a way. It gets very philosophical and even spiritual, the way she talks about it. But yes, when I say foreground, I'm referring to basically patriarchy, and background, I'm referring to anything that is founded in female powers. So, positivity with a capital P is having hope and rage that moves women into action, to stand up and speak out, to love so deeply that one fights back, to be brave enough to see the truth and express moral outrage, to be holy and expanding. Oh. Holy is a word that I've also like to submit for your approval. I used it here. It means, it's a combination of the word whole and the word holy. To be spiritually whole, to be divinely whole, basically. WHOLY, one L. If you spell it with two L's, then you're just saying holy as in like whole. But I mean it both ways. So women would be holy. And men, conversely, would be unholy. Because they are not whole. They are half beings, like parasites, you know? Trust your perceptions discussion on the Y chromosome. Men are quite literally parasites. It's not a metaphor. And that parasitism of females is the very nature of their being at their core. And everything that they do is just, as she says, the long shadow of that, basically. The long shadow of the Y. Yes. So think positivity or positivity. Holy versus unholy, right? Being divinely whole versus being demonically unwhole. Or women and men. Anyway, yeah, so the warrior's path, question mark, positivity. Which positivity do you mean? How are we thinking about positivity? Because positivity with the lowercase p, like I defined earlier, ironically is actually negativity, right? Being pacified, being weak, not being able to defend yourself or stand up for what you love, to protect what you love, that's negative. That's negative. Looking the other way and pretending like the problem's not there, that's fucking negative. That's having brain damage. That is the practice of having brain damage. Refusing to use the brain that you were given by Mother Nature in the way it was intended to be used, which is to be putting two and two together. But when we dissociate, when we deny, go into denial, right? The positive thinking that patriarchy wants us to do is really about just dissociation. It's really about forgetting, having amnesia. You know, that's the practice of having brain damage. Another term I'd like to submit for your consideration, which, man, I don't think I've actually written out the definition of that. I've talked about it. I'll talk about brain damage in another topic. Specifically what I mean by that word. I think you probably get a general idea of what I mean by it, but I do want to go into details about it in a different talk though, different time. Anyway, thank you all for listening.